good evening. Less than 12 hours ago, I was literally on a Caribbean island, and I just made it here. I did have a buffer, but when I walked in, Max was very happy to see me. The trip I was just in was a very special trip, and it was very impactful, and because of it, I'm going to go off script here from what I had originally planned to talk about, at least initially. See, this island where I was at, it's a very special island. It's a beautiful island. It's an island that is not only beautiful to the eye, but is endowed with special fauna and some would say special natural resources. But it's an island populated by people who are mostly living way below their potential. In fact, too many of them are living below the poverty line. And while I was on this island, I was reminded about an episode that really marked me in my life and in fact got me on the path that I've been on. Several decades ago, about 3 decades ago, a child, me in a car, stopped on a stoplight, finishing his breakfast, an empanada, which is a very traditional food from the country where I was born, made by my mom, nicely packed, warm, delicious, air conditioning blowing, leather seats. I hear a knocking to my left. I turn, young kid, about my age. Couldn't hear him, soundproof windows, but because of his hand gestures, I knew what he was saying. He wanted food. Before I could even consider lowering the window, the light must have turned green, car moved. My day was to continue as it always did. I would be taken to one of the best schools in the country, and I was one of the few that was fortunate enough to have a family who had the means to provide for those opportunities. I'm not sure what it was about that kid. Perhaps it was the fact that he was literally eye to eye right here as I turned. He was my age. Maybe it was the fact he had no shoes, he was clearly poor, perhaps malnourished. It impacted me. The following days, I looked for the kid. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to give him my next empanada. I never did see that kid again. But as a result of that encounter, as brief as it was, I realized that I had been so fortunate in my life. There were kids, many more of them, on the other side of that window, by the millions, not only in the country of my birth, but in the world at large. I'm sure many of you here feel that sentiment of almost a commitment to want to help, to give back, to bring those people out of poverty, to give them the opportunities we have been blessed with or created for ourselves. And I was no different. And in fact, for many years thereafter, that was my focus. I went to school precisely handpicked so that I could have the biggest impact. When I looked at how people were helping the needy, it was generally those who had been very fortunate to be wealthy enough, accumulate wealth, so they could then give it back to society. So for me, that meant I had to be a successful businessman. I had to be an entrepreneur. And because of that, I picked the #1 entrepreneurship school in the world, Babson College, to become an entrepreneur, so that I could accumulate wealth and then give it back. But what I discovered while I was at Babson was that there were some very significant differences between wealth accumulation and wealth creation. Wealth creation comes, as you know, from constant innovation, where individuals are seeking better ways to satisfy their own needs and desires. And it is creation, it is not accumulation by itself, as if it came from thin air. Wealth is not money. Wealth is so much more. And it dawned on me as I went on studying how to be a successful businessman that all this required a certain system, a certain set of contexts, certain conditions, if you will, where wealth was created or not. Just like certain soils can provide seeds that sprout and grow and flourish. Now, these conditions I thought about, I thought I had the answer. Ultimately, what was very evident to me is that Most of those things that we found valuable came about because of a certain series of dynamics. Competition, openness is at the core of that, and not just with material things. This is an example of ideas competing against each other, cooperating and building on top of each other. That is where my idea of contrapreneurship originally came from. Being in an entrepreneurial school and seeing how enterprise flourished, I wondered, why can't those same principles apply to what we generally think about as this basket of services we call government? In fact, what if indeed all that was a basket of services that was being provided in a bundle for a fixed price by a single provider, generally with some coercive powers? What if instead of that model, there was the same model that has yielded so many things that we benefit from that we generally associate with a higher and higher and higher standard of living? What if those conditions applied to that system that we called government and countries? That's where contrapreneurship came from. Of course, it was just an idea. Babson was a great place to develop it. But it wasn't until 2014 where this idea finally seemed to find an application, a real-world opportunity to put it to practice. This idea came about through Babson as well. They had put together a group of top thinkers to realize that as the population of the world grows, these kids that for me were on the other side of the window needed a place to be. And so future cities were going to emerge all over the world. These cities had to have hard infrastructure, or hardware if you will, and they also need software, set of rules and conditions and dynamics that were going to dictate and either create the conditions where wealth could be created, or perhaps replicate conditions throughout the world that, far from creating, at best try to redistribute and generally destroy wealth. And this was great. Conceptually, all of a sudden, the world opened up because it wasn't at the expense of existing countries and the system of governments that we have, but in fact, the idea that new cities were going to be created regardless opened a space for cooperation with these countries where if you did it right, if you created the conditions on the ground appropriately, you could perhaps do it from the scratch, the way that we have learned over decades and now centuries of what works. And so we put together this idea that indeed we could collaborate with states and governments to create a zoning and a series of conditions for maximizing prosperity. This small island I was in is one of many places that is thinking this way. Friends in this group are thinking this way. And what's exciting is that it's no longer just an idea. There are literally dozens of places around the world that have a need, perhaps a desperate need, and are seeing the light in some ways about this opportunity. And those two things are coming together to create a sweet spot where innovation in the system that underpins human interaction can be created from scratch with an optimal design to maximize prosperity. New Way Capital was created as the first venture capital firm, to my knowledge, in the world, focused on finding these movements around the world, providing them with knowledge and expertise and seed capital, just as you would with an early stage company, to nourish these early stage movements, to develop the new societies, the new ways to self-organize, optimally designed for prosperity. So I hope you will find me and we can have a conversation about how to plant the seed for prosperity with this new opportunity that we have for the coming years, decades, and centuries. Thank you.